Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another LegalTech Talks. My name is Frances Anderson and I'm the MD of Net Law Media. Now, today I'm thrilled to be hosting sort of a coffee side chat. So I have got my coffee. I don't know if you have, Eric, but I certainly have, on Blue Sky or Reality Check. And for many people who don't already know him, Eric is a global futurist. He's a speaker and an author. He is the managing director for the futurist consultancy Spherical Models and chief technology officer for the US-based law firm Bradford and Barthel. Now, in addition, Eric studies how the future of technology and human behavior continually evolve and intersect the globe over. Spherical Models teaches how to recognize, create, and leverage new business and process models in leading organizational change through current reality of global business model disruption. So for the past 9 years, Eric has worked with organizations across the world, such as Google, IBM, HPC, is now TEDx, the Polytechnic University in Hong Kong, KM Asia, KM Europe, KM Congress in India, Social Now in Portugal, Global Legal Forum in The Hague, and many, many more. So now, before we continue, I'm going to run through a little bit of the housekeeping with everyone sort of listening in. And I know a lot of you have been with us before, so will understand what you need to do. And I know many of you have many Zoom sessions as well. So, but if you want to join us in the conversation, please feel free, because both Eric and I would love to draw you in, hear your comments. Do you agree? Do you not agree? And what we'll do is we'll bring them into the flow through the chat function. So if you look down below, you'll have the chat option there. So keep it open. You can ask a question anonymously or raise your hand. So click on your name, right mouse click it, and you should be able to then open up the option to raise your hand and we'll bring you in live. It'll be great to hear your voice as well. So before we continue, you know, this session will last about an hour, but as I said, Q&A throughout. So firstly, welcome, Eric. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here to us. And it's been a little while since we saw each other. March, isn't that right?
It's been since March, yep. Flew back just 3 days before everything shut down. So you were the last people I saw abroad, Francis.
So yes, it's great. So welcome back, but virtually, you know, I'm sure we'll raise a drink like with many others who are listening in again.
Absolutely.
So let's have a look at what we're going to be talking about. So we talk a lot about the future of technology and where the market is now and what firms are currently doing. As we, the legal community, step into the new phase of workflow and collaboration, let's cut through the red tape of blue sky thinking and discuss actually what's fact from fiction and what is about to be for the legal profession. So Eric, you highlight post-pandemic perception-based technologies. What does this actually mean to you and to others?
So with the pandemic, a lot of what's happening right now we're doing is what businesses have been doing all over the world. It's what they've had to do. And it's interesting that when we're using video-based technologies, this is something that's been around for a number of years, decade, right? Where you can have access to these type of interfaces. The interesting thing is that it wasn't leveraged nearly as much as it currently is for obvious reasons. We could always meet together, interact together. But with this type of need for interaction through video, and there's another need now for more sensory-based applications. Things like virtual reality, augmented reality. These are things when talked about 3-5 years ago. It either work with corporate boards or audiences with this. There would be appreciation for it, but the thought that this is way too far down the line. Just something that is just not going to impact us in the next 3 to 5 years. But now that have this use case, for example, even where we are right now, Francis, I think, in my opinion, we're using relatively antiquated technology to do the type of connectivity that we have right now. We're using video-based technology where I think people very much long for that 3D level type of interaction, the ability to see each other across the boardroom, the ability to come up, shake hands, even if it's a virtual handshake, and sit down and set whatever different setting they might want, particularly for those that have pre-existing conditions that have been very confined for extended periods of time that might want to actually experience a different open area, whether it be by an ocean or whether it be just a kind of a grand hall, these different perspectives. And again, these things I think may have sounded trite before. What a nice add-on to add to a meeting, but not necessary. But as we're finding now, these kinds of things are so necessary, that human level of interaction. Therefore, perception-based technologies. And perception, I want to make sure I draw a point that not just the visual that we have, but oftentimes that we need that feel of the wind or something different. And again, it can sound odd, it sounds sci-fi, but these are the things people long for, and I think people can relate to after being cooped up for so long.
I mean, I agree. I mean, let's look at VR and augmented reality, because, you know, if we really look at the workflows currently, I know many law firms who I've spoken to currently use VR in design, mapping out internal projects with their teams as well. So where are they using it practically at the moment, and where do you see this heading, especially with AR? Because let's be frank, I know many lawyers, even though they are very, how do I say it? They like hearing themselves, they like talking, they like debating, they like getting involved, they're very good at law. Many of them will be very hesitant about becoming a Barthel, per se.
I definitely hear you on that. And so far with VR and AR, they've been used in multiple industries in very specific circumstances. So, I mean, for example, if you're going to be building bridges in India and you're part of an engineering team there, AR can be used to see across the span of area that you're looking at, help with the calculations real-time, cross-referenced with the cloud in order to deliver what you need. But even in those specific use cases, we're confined by our connectivity. And that's part of the reason for what I'm calling this relatively antiquated technology we have across now. We have better connectivity than we did 10 years ago, so video is working out better for us. The software platforms, the base that we're using, it's certainly evolved, but the connectivity has come up. For VR and AR to move into use cases that would be practical for these virtual type of environments that we would like to further, we need to have tremendous growth in connectivity. And there's progress being made there. Elon Musk with Starlink, Amazon with their competitive aspects towards Starlink. Some of these different, you're trying to get these satellites in the air delivering connectivity to areas that have had very low connectivity for such a long period of time. Then, of course, there's the 5G evolution that's taking place. Of course, it makes press for a lot of different reasons that have nothing to do with the 5G network itself, depending on which country is backing it and so forth, and supplying the hardware, software, and so forth. However, when it comes towards the end game of it, we're looking at these type of evolutions that need to be in place, and then some, in order to take advantage of what some of these things can do. So therefore, to the point you made, when it comes towards certain specific areas like design, or if you can actually be in controlled areas where there's high levels of connectivity, then things like this can be deployed. But even that is a step ahead of where we've been, where you have these isolated, specialized pockets. If we can grow from that a bit and start to bring it into areas, including the legal practice, I think we could have some, there's definite benefit to that. There's a step forward for that. To answer your human-related question to it, Francis, as far as the type of personalities attorneys are and can be, some of the best attorneys can be fantastic debaters, fantastic litigators, great with people. Others are tremendous researchers. They're incredible with research, and the firm would not want to put them in front of a client. They're just not person, that kind of thing, right? If you understand the turn of phrase, so to speak, right? So, people. But I think when it comes to this, though, when we're looking at how to use this technology with the different personalities, it doesn't change that much with the way that we currently do, the way you'll deploy technology based off of personality type, strength, and skill set, if that makes sense.
Do you think this also, look at training? So if we have a look at down, we are currently in a situation where you're now limited, you know, people are being encouraged to, you know, work from home again. This applies to multiple jurisdictions. So do you see this kicking off a lot within the training area? So looking at, for example, VR, where is the practical side you're seeing this sort of picking up, especially with your clients at the moment?
So one of the things that we really could have a use case for VR for is, I don't know how it is where in your area right now, but as far as interacting at court, interacting with judges. Beforehand, a lot of times the blocking wasn't coming from the law firm itself or the clients, but it was the actual judicial system itself relative to the state, country, or jurisdiction. And there's a lot of precedent, and there's a lot of weight behind the personalities behind that precedent for the way things are done. Now, of course, there's a lot more of an open feeling towards this. So I think in that case, when it comes towards judicial areas, when you're actually going towards arguing, presenting in front of, or presenting in court, using exhibits, these type of things, I think that VR has a very practical application. Another practical application for it would be if you're using remote depositions. Remote depositions, again, with that virtual reality, it's not just as it's happening, but it's also how it's captured. Because if you record how it's captured, then you can be replayed and look at the nuances that end up taking place. All of that's critically important, particularly when you're lacking that face-to-face and we're trying to get to that next best, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, looking back again, so, the work from home model and what we're talking about here, where you've got sort of looking at the kind of workflows, many firms have sort of redesigned internal offices. So I know there's a lot of interesting conversations taking place with the senior management. And what is the impact of rethinking workplace environments now? And where do you think we are heading with this, especially taking into account the people, and businesses crave that face-to-face as well?
I think we're looking at a hybrid environment, Francis. You already have some companies, whether it's JP Morgan or you have that are looking at bringing back individuals into the workplace. You have some companies like Amazon that are moving forward with campus design to bring individuals in there. Now, again, I'm answering outside of law for a reason, because oftentimes some of the most innovative companies out there will design these living, breathing campuses, right? And then different industries can take a look at that and see what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And that's something that's been talked about for a number of years and tried in some instances. I know Riverview Law has tried some different areas of this, different practices around the globe have tried their take. It's not something to be taken lightly, because it's quite a financial investment to redesign a physical space, to either look and having your organization invest in buying the space that you're looking at, or if you already are, how is it restructured? But if you're like a number of organizations where you're leasing different office space from time to time, particularly in this moving economic environment that we have, sometimes the choices become less limited. Become more limited. I'm throwing all of that into the answer, Francis, because again, the pandemic has heightened this particular aspect. And so many people have now pulled back from the office. There are now perspectives of, well, why go back to the office at all? And I'm not part of that camp. There are also those that say, well, everybody needs to go back and be part of what it was, and I'm also not a part of that camp. I think very much in this instance, a hybrid approach works very well, where you find individuals that are able to thrive working from home. You find individuals that don't have productivity issues doing so. They still tend to have that level of engagement. And then when it comes to specified instances, whether it's certain board meetings or whether it's certain areas, or again, when we're allowed to come out again and you end up having a meeting at different restaurants, these type of social engagements, those things that move forward. I think the level of client engagements that marketers and client relations specialists have, I think some of the best business models tend to thrive around the old-fashioned handshake, remembering the name, making sure you establish these relationships. People respond very well to spending time, sharing food, cocktails, these kinds of things. As we go post-pandemic, I see certainly those things returning in a big way. People are going to need it. But when it comes to running the operational side of the business, I think the cost savings that have been seen during these last 6 months are just going to be too great to have a full return to where we were for a number of companies, including law. And I think that a number of law firms have already seen, look, we can reduce a lot of office space, and in reducing that office space, move forward with some of these shared environments where you may still have some attorneys have their dedicated offices that may like that, or workspaces, but this also opens up existing spaces for more creative design, open space experiments, whether it's with color, plant life, a lot of things we tend to take for granted, but that research has shown with some of the aforementioned tech companies, engineering companies, that people respond to over time. Their productivity increases over time. That's opportunity costs that are important for law firms to realize.
I can see many equity partners nodding their head on the cost-saving part. Many IT directors go, fantastic, yes, in the terms of, we've been talking about trying to, give us more the ability to work from home. Trust us. You know, we let us do our job. So you've got a conflict going on. But looking at the hybrid solutions, what do you see sort of, you know, what are you actually seeing on here? Where can things be done more? Especially looking at law, you look at the kind of established backbone that has been. You've got some firms which are a little bit more advanced. You mentioned One Riverview Law, you know, Dentons. You've got others as well who've invested quite heavily. You know, Ashurst. You've got where they've got these fantastic, you know, creative sides to them, allowing their teams to really open up to client initiatives and servicing those clients' needs. Right. What do you see, you know, what do you see is going to be can work, and what can be done more, do you think, in these kind of spaces?
I think it depends on the practice area of the law firms involved. So for example, some practice areas are going to be extremely high volume, low profit margin. In that instance, a lot of the law that they're going to be practicing may not be as open to as much collaboration, and is going to be more conducive towards individuals that need a more confined environment by choice of the attorney themselves, that need, look, I'm just working nonstop on this type of thing. Others, I think you're going to have higher profit margin practice areas, less billable hours, more need for collaboration, research. How do I tackle this approach? What do you think? These creative areas where you end up having people that you need to talk to each other, where you're looking at this more of like a larger project, each file being worked, as opposed to more of an assembly line approach. Different practice areas have different needs, different approaches. Therefore, the environment that these different practice areas are worked, I think, would then fluctuate depending. Some firms, of course, have multiple practice areas and may say, well, we can't have a different environment for every single practice area that we support. And I think the idea is to try to find the commonalities between the two, where they cross over, where it makes the most sense. Some firms have already case studied that, again, as we talked about the aforementioned personality types, they'll go more by personality type, investing in the type of software that will analyze how the attorney is working over time based off feedback from not only HR, but management, colleagues, and so forth, and saying, okay, individual X and Y and Z, they're actually working great with this creative space. Let's continue doing that. However, let's not try to push individual D, for example, into this box that isn't working for them. They're working very well. They're not a people person. They want to have this isolated aspect. So I think that those are the different kind of things that will influence law firms as they go, at least from a high-minded perspective. I think that the aforementioned cost when it comes to these things, again, I think firms would need to take a look at and see some of these creative spaces may cost more at the front side. But again, the reason why so many tech companies and engineering companies, whether it's Google or Apple or Amazon, or you have these different perspectives coming in saying, hey, there's a lot of opportunity cost coming from this when we see that when you change the nature of the way people work, it keeps them working there longer. And again, this is the part of that hybrid where you'll have people working at home. And so it sort of contrasts with that you're leveraging this at-home creative space these individuals have. That brings into how can we still be collaborative and creative the way that we are trying to be currently with the pandemic, and how we can add to that and augment that and then bridge everyone across. So again, I think that's where that hybrid aspect comes across from these areas. Do law firms need to have these exotic, expensive campuses that tech firms are currently building? I don't think so. But can they leverage can they get there in a lot of different innovative ways by studying a lot of the different businesses that are outside of law that find success in different areas, different cities, or in outlying areas that have leveraged success? Absolutely.
So we've got someone who's asked the question just coming in when we're talking sort of about the hybrid and work from home kind of aspect. It's anonymous, but saying, my concern is in the area of security, especially with many people working at home. Since during this lockdown period, there have been reports on an increase in hacking. So looking at the kind of tech and where things are evolving, you know, what's your kind of thoughts in this area? Because obviously it's a mass concern, I think, for a lot of firms, isn't it, at the moment, especially with their lawyers. Yes, looking at the creative hubs we were just talking about as well.
Right. Security is a huge issue, and it's not going to be going away. For every time that you end up having a foolproof environment that no one's going to be able to hack into, a team of hackers will get notice of it and hack into it. It's sort of the law that we tend to live by at the moment. And that doesn't mean that we throw up our hands and give up. Obviously, we have to do everything we can to protect client information. When you have some of the top governments in the world with all of the money in the world, literally, being hacked themselves, we can see how big of a problem this is. The best law firms can do is do their due diligence the same way that they were in-house, and do the best that they can to, when taking a look at some of this remote connectivity that we have with these different environments, to make sure that how the information is being accessed is done in the most secure way possible, just as we would if we were in controlled office environments. Now, obviously, depending on where you are in the globe in different areas, you don't necessarily have control over how the individual configures their personal network, how they configure, or basically what they've put into their personal network. Sometimes the law firm can be completely constrained as far as, look, you just don't have enough connectivity. We can't make you have enough connectivity, but we need X amount, particularly with connecting with VPN or these different areas that, or whether they're providing through secure cloud access. We need to make sure that you have enough to connect in a way that we can provide the most protection possible for the firm. And if you can't meet that, then we need to have that conversation on how that goes. These are very personal conversations that I know law firms have been happening, organizations have been happening. But when it comes towards this, a firm line of what the firm can do to ensure this home environment meets the critical needs of the firm when it comes to these aspects, it currently isn't settled law when it comes from state by state by state yet in the United States, and I'm sure is the case in other areas of the world. Again, the pandemic is just so new when it comes towards settled law, towards establishing security baseline with remote workers. I think that's something still to come.
So you're getting tested from all facets right now, Eric, on the questions. It's great. Let's go back. So looking at the kind of workplace environment, because obviously there's that hesitancy, isn't there, in spend right now with firms, especially having already sort of realigned a few things, getting everything safe, secure, ready for return to the office. Yeah. And then sort of being hit with sort of updates from government on this side. So a macro impact going, right, you've got to go the opposite direction again. But what do you think, looking at the big tech giants, so the big four, business can take from remote working in terms of setup and also in collaborative environments? Because I think that's key right now, isn't it? Is the collaborative side in pushing forwards, especially next 6 months and beyond, where, as you talk about, hybrid. Right.
Collaboration aspects that we're looking at, I think, right now, for example, as you and I are chatting back and forth, there's live chat, there's all of the different elements coming in, bottom of the screens to the side. If you have multiple laptops up, you can engage in different areas at the same time. And there's also the understanding of the individuals interacting that they're doing the same thing. Everyone is trying to multitask as they're currently doing what they're currently working on. In some essence, that's collaboration. In other essence, there's, one could argue, particularly again, when it comes to the specific practice of law or the attorney working that area of law or the teams involved, sometimes you try to balance collaboration and distraction. Having people work together towards a cohesive goal where you're furthering where you want to go, but then also where the time isn't being spent the best way that it possibly could. And I think those are some of the problems that we face with collaboration-based technologies sometimes. Some of the most seamless ones that work are based off of the ones we use in our everyday. It's been a fact that we've seen for some time. The social media type of giants, their type of software is purposefully so addictive for people to use, so easy to interact with. The most successful technologies in the legal space and others that translate to business either share collaboration space in those social areas and just bridge the technology directly across, or they've copied as much as they can to bring that sort of subtle nuance in. Because as we know, if you roll out different levels of software to the firm, you're going to end up having only so much of the population that ends up using it. If you end up having 70% use what you've spent, let's say if you're a large firm around the globe, let's say you spend $5 million and you end up having 70% of your attorneys use it. For a lot of firms, they've written case studies saying that was a tremendous success, which is pretty extraordinary. And then there are a lot of case studies of where you end up having a lot of the attorneys using 20% of the software that's rolled out. So obviously these are choices we need to really think about when talking about collaboration. I'm answering that question deliberately looking to the future. deliberately looking towards, as we learn from the pandemic and we engage with new level collaboration technologies that are sold as such, marketed as such, this will help the remote workers that we have, or even continue to roll out during pandemic. I think it's really important for the firms to step back and take a look at, let's really analyze it, let's test it, let's take a look at how people are working, let's try to shy away from arbitrary measured benchmarks that may have worked in the past that are no longer working now, in order to take a look at the best ways to leverage collaboration through technology, let alone in the face-to-face level of engagement that obviously we tend to have. And that right now, as we have reopenings, closures, we have to navigate through.
So looking at that kind of opening closures and also having looking at the kind of collaboration piece, what does innovation mean to you in this context, especially if you drill into where the firms are, and possibly any kind of insights we can gain maybe from the finance industry, because there's a lot going on that side, I think, as well, isn't there? And as you said, big tech. What's innovation mean for you when we talk about that in this instance?
Innovation in this context, I think, comes when you're looking at changing the way that the individual works, changing a way that the group works, and doing so in a way that leverages, I'll use the term again, the best future opportunity costs going forward. You tie innovation with capturing opportunity costs. Right now, I think that there's a big movement afoot in research and development in tech companies. And I know it's in some of the topics we're going to get to a little bit later, but there's a struggle in that area right now in tech companies, where before there's this concept that we'll have this designated area, DeepMind or OpenAI, and it's going to be around this incredible level of AI. Just talk about the epitome of innovation that people would think about, right? Not the type of AI that we tend to talk about a lot in law, where you're looking at very incremental measured benchmarks, but things where you're looking at these transformational type of ideals. But then it hits this reality swell of, well, these ideals need financial investment and money and backing. And with that comes leverage from the companies doing that backing. And that can be okay, because suddenly this high-minded becomes channeled towards a tangible, profitable motive, so to speak. So when I'm talking about innovation, I'm talking about that aspect because law firms face that. And they face that, and that's something that's very real that we have to look at as an industry. How do you take these high-minded ideals, even some of the concepts that I'm talking about right now, and channel that into tangible action? And so innovation, I think, ends up becoming a blend of those two. You have to have the high-minded ideals looking out this way, and you have to have the tangible, we need to stay in the black perspective as far as how are we going to be looking at monthly costs, daily costs, 3-day costs, in addition to the opportunity cost. It sounds like a paradox. And I think in a way, that's what innovation is, because you have to have an organization that can blend those two. And it can sound easy, but it can be incredibly frustrating, particularly when you're within an organization where you're frustrated by, let's say you have this vision, but the board you're working with perhaps doesn't. Or you have this vision and there are others that have this vision, but you can't agree on how to execute the vision. And then sometimes either nothing gets done or a frustrating mishmash compromise that isn't the vision of anybody involved happens, and then it doesn't end up working out. And so these are the challenges we have to look at, and it's very real.
So I know, Larry, I do see your question there. I haven't brought it in just yet, Larry, and the main reason why it's talking about GPT-3. So we're going to get into that very shortly, and I'll bring your question in at the same time, I think, because I know Eric will enjoy answering it. So looking at and examining the exciting parts of digital transformation. So, we're seeing some absolutely amazing technologies out there, concepts which are coming into fruition. So let's discuss what is a bit far-fetched and actually what's impacting the firms right now, because you've got some which you can see coming up, and you've got others which are starting to roll in not so much under the cover, but bit by bit and more. And even GPT-3 in a way is already sitting there. So where are you seeing this at the moment for you, Eric?
As far as what's the
latest out there? What's the latest out there, and what is actually rolling in our way?
Got it. Okay. The latest out there that I've been taking a look at has to do around quantum technology, the aforementioned GPT-3, augmented and virtual realities, and connectivity. I look at all of them as a cohesive whole. So for example, taking a look at GPT-3, for example, part of what makes it work, I talked about the business side of some of these aspects. OpenAI gets $1 billion investment from Microsoft. They bring in a CTO that has a track record of being able to deliver very good product sets that can go to market. And so then how can you take a look at these and make sense of what's happening? Well, you also take a look at the high performance computing, supercomputing. Sometimes that's correlated with the innovations in quantum computing. That backing and that reality is part of what's driving some of the innovations in research in OpenAI to develop GPT-3. So now you have everything happening between that level of investment from Microsoft into OpenAI. Part of what GPT-3 is that we're seeing some released, I think, just the first glimpses of what can be capable of, and some of the idea that now you're looking at more of this generalist-based AI as opposed to a narrow-based AI. But again, as far as let's push it into law, not ready yet. It's still more of an research and development. We can test it in law in specific areas. So in research and development areas within specific law firms, those that have partners that head up research and development, as some firms do, this would be something very worthwhile to take a look at and see where some of the trends are. Back to the aforementioned quantum computing is being used in computational chemistry. It's used for, as one would think, looking at quantum equations. Quantum computing reminds me right now of the way that we were back before computers were networked. Back when you had these large computer sets and they were isolated and these research areas would use them, right? And so that's a lot of what quantum computing is currently. That's where it is, where we're at, is just because of the nature of quantum computing, the environment has to be kept so cold, so isolated to be able to work with the particles in this way. And so when talking with some of the different companies about this, or government agencies, the Department of Defense in the US, or Google, or Microsoft, or some of the different companies in China that are currently working on this, a lot of the feedback I've gotten from this is that there's a lot of exciting research. There's a lot of things trending with quantum right now in specific narrow areas of this research. But as far as that breakthrough coming through with quantum, that's something that we're still looking as far as that would reach that more generalized area. As GPT-3, as I mentioned, can be looked at and has the potential for a more generalized context. But again, they all tie together. Let's say you have a quantum breakthrough and you have it in these specific areas. When I mentioned connectivity before, you can imagine the level of connectivity that we would need to really take advantage of what some of these, some of what that supercomputing is capable of. However, when you're looking at driving innovations in law, people will look to quantum because obviously that's a rogue wave, earth-shattering transformation level of technology that's being researched. But high performance computing continues trending. And even though with Moore's law, we're not able to work in silicon the way that we were, that level of doubling, you can hear arguments a lot of different ways, but a lot of perspectives are that's leveling off that we've had, that we've taken for granted, this multi-trillion-dollar industry on innovation, the name Silicon Valley itself, being able to work in areas so small, but because of these movements forward with intelligent programming, generalized artificial intelligence, again, not the stuff of sci-fi movies, but more of how can we get intelligent programming to continue doubling productivity with compute graphical power that we have on existing infrastructure? How can we get these high performance computing, supercomputing environments to continue to perform in these innovative ways? It's leveraging a lot of these different software areas. Those areas are tangible. Those areas are happening fast. You see it with automation in cars. You see it with the level of driver automation research happening with cars. You see it with the level of research that biotech is doing towards the pandemic, where normally you end up having years going towards the look at a vaccine, and so many different companies are leveraging some of this high compute in a way to very intelligent management with highly educated people towards these given designs. And I'm bringing that up as a model purposefully last because it's something everybody can relate to when we're looking at how in the world could this apply to law. And my final response to it would be this. If you have highly educated individuals like you have in law, and you need to try to channel different ways to help them execute what they do, and some of the people involved may not have those highly specialized level of education or field practice that some of these individuals do. These are the lessons we can look at from taking things like high performance computing, different management techniques and executing it into a tangible fashion.
So Larry's put through too. So part of it you have already sort of answered in terms of the emergence of GPT-3 data analytics.
Yeah, right.
So how part of it is, though, how are you seeing it impacting the connectivity and security concerns? So you've got the security aspect here he wants to bring in, but also there's the second part he's talking about where, and I absolutely agree, as legal wakes up to these tech innovations, the citizen developers working at his or her desktop will become a reality. Access to justice will become more available to more people. Will lawyers find this threatening or welcome it? What's your kind of thoughts, especially from the conversations you've been having around this?
I think that it depends on the aforementioned practice of law. For those that operate within a more automated structure, where they're doing a lot of similar work that takes place throughout the day, that's classically primed for more automation. For a lot more of the aforementioned collaborative, creative, different type of civil type of aspects of law, or for example, if you're looking for whether there's the aforementioned white collar or you have criminal defense, these type of aspects where you're going to be leveraging these tools to help with the research. But on the other hand, you're still the people, the defendants, the ones that need the attorney, whether you're a company that's facing fraud or fighting fraud, you're going to still want to be able to go after the best individuals, the best reputation, the firm that knows how to handle this practice. Oftentimes, people will pay for that privilege to know that they're working with the best to help with this incredible problem that they have. And then if you end up using some of these different aforementioned technologies to help augment that team to do the best they can, that's certainly a selling point. But I think what we look at with law is that would become a new baseline. All of the top different competitors, whether you'd have the Magic Circle firms in New York, in Asia and Hong Kong, they would bring in these type of different technologies as a default as part of the research that would be involved in establishing the best way to tackle the different cases at hand. But again, I think it comes back towards the area of practice. Certain area of practices are going to be impacted much more than others, and to a certain extent, they already are. And I'll take a quick contrary point of view to that, only in just saying that some areas that are extremely high volume, low profit margin businesses have already had to implement so many different technologies to keep those margins profitable. And some of those firms are some of the most innovative firms out there by default. So in some ways, you can get back to this more of a contrary point of view, where some firms that have incredibly large profit margins resist going in this innovative way too far or capitalizing on some of these things too long, and then they end up losing out, if that makes sense. When it comes to the security part of your question, Francis, I think that's something that it's the level of developers, the type of developers that end up using GPT-3, when you look at the type of salaries, oftentimes they're paid 7 figures. The individuals that are really able to work with a type of AI, and they're snatched up. You can look at some of the different companies that have been bought out for this, where they might have, they might end up paying 400 and plus million towards 700 employees. Then this is the type of, they're buying for the type of talent that is being delivered towards this. And so I think that all of that is happening. You have a whole lot of human talent helping what we're seeing with something like GPT-3 being designed behind the scenes. So yes, citizen developers having access to it are going to be able to, there's going to be a lot of need for regulation around it and policy around it. Again, that isn't settled. That needs to be taken place. And I think that's currently the biggest deterrent to that we could have towards the formation of security around this, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, because I know in the UK here, they're still looking at it, and the SRA, one of the big parts of it is, the responsibility. You have a look at artificial intelligence. Who is responsible? Where does the responsibility lie of this new technology coming in? There's a lot to be answered for it. And I think, and it's how do you govern this next level? And the current legislation isn't at the speed of where the technology is, especially where we are digitally, and what is being developed, as you said, by these teams and some great minds as well. I mean, but let's take a look at the current now, where HPC is, and, quantum is being discussed. We were talking about it, I think, even in March at the British Legal Technology Forum. So where is this going to be where is this impacting the legal profession? How is it going to shape things like in the midterm? So if we have a look over the next 24 months, can you see it coming through and impacting in the shorter term rather than say the longer term investment, which may be 3 years, 4 years?
I would say that quantum is longer term. I would say that shorter term is high performance computing. High performance computing leveraged more by technology companies that partner with larger players. Let's say whether it's IBM, SAP, those that have billions of dollars in research and development, those that have a lot of money to pour into this, or research and development research companies like LexisNexis, those that have their entire business model is around you being able to get after information as quickly and efficiently as possible and finding different methods to get at that data. And then I think there'll be the technology startups, the ones that come in and see an opportunity that some of the larger players currently aren't developing. And then in doing that, they would end up coming in and saying, okay, how can we end up leveraging a lot of the high performance computing aspects out there in order to get at the data faster in more innovative ways than some of the classic players have been doing. I think the companies that end up doing that are going to be very successful, and there are companies, I think, already doing that in the legal space. Whether you take a look at the different financial players, whether it's Fulcrum or Aderant or Elite, and you take a look at which ones currently have these type of partnerships, that type of backing to help push them in that area, whether you look at some of the different practice management areas in place, and which ones, again, have those partnerships. If you end up doing the research, who's been investing, who's been buying into. These are really important things to look at for things like high performance computing and quantum, because these are very expensive investments. And I think for them to be successful, law firms need to partner with the right technology vendors that have those partnerships in place.
Yeah, I think, this is the interesting part, is that kind of partnership model. And I think, let's have a look. I mean, the profession is split. So you've got obviously the larger tier firms who have the ability to invest and deploy more.
Right.
What would you say where it concerns the smaller businesses? Innovation is just as much key for them, who may struggle to connect, to deal with a lot of these solutions. What would your advice be, if we have a look at the innovation they need to be able to compete and to develop, because they are also the next phase, aren't they? They are upskilling just as much.
Absolutely, definitely. And in talking about that, I could certainly say that smaller companies, and let's say those that are, let's say you have 100 attorneys or less, so to speak, as far as that goes, as far as the field of law goes, 250 employees or less, as far as that goes. So you're coming from the mid-size, you're coming into the smaller size, and then even getting smaller from there. Again, a lot of the innovation can come from these leveraged partnerships that one has with some of these different players. You can take a look at a big name cloud provider like Google or Microsoft, and then you end up integrating their product, not just for what they're offering because you're counting on their research and development to further your product. You can have a player, again, looking in the financial services market, and you're doing your research, deciding who you want to work with, who are they partnered with, who are they backed by. That research and development is not spent by that smaller firm. It's spent by the technology vendor you've partnered with. And so it's about doing the research and saying, where do we want to go? What's the investment strategy of these different partners? The legal field is made up of a lot of smaller technology players that specialize in the field of law, which can be great, and they can actually operate in a fantastic way for certain specific needs legal has. They can also be great to work with in some case because you know the people year in, year out. But some of the advantages of doing your research and working with these technology-related vendors that have chosen to partner with some of these larger backwards is you capitalize on that R&D in a way that some of these other technology players just don't have the resources to do.
No, I think people always feel missed out, if we don't talk about where things are, what can be available for firms, at all scales. But let's have a look at the crystal ball, Eric, and what you've been doing at spherical models. But what do you see in this, in your future predictions? What are you seeing in your crystal ball for legal profession, for professional services?
Got it. Over the next 3 to 5 years, just taking a look at it, obviously as you come out of pandemic, as things you get vaccines rolling come the end of the year, beginning of next year, that's going to be a continual thing for some time. There's so many different companies working on vaccines right now. And so I think that as companies begin to open up and we end up getting a lot of the different type of travel, interaction that we have, a lot of the hyper focus that we currently have on that shifts and gets back towards where business is moving forward. That's a critical step that ends up taking, obviously, within the next year. It has to in so many different areas, right? And then as we move forward past that, it's the aforementioned connectivity. We have to get that integration to 5G, and we have to get a lot of the different concepts by Musk and others around Starlink, these different satellite level technologies, the level of fiber being laid. We need more connectivity to take advantage of some of the aforementioned perceptive-based technologies that we discussed. Augmented virtual realities, having that fully encapsulated type of environment, being able to capture more of the different senses that we have with remote and collaborative work. These things, I think, end up taking place as you get some of that connectivity too, because again, some of the hardest work for this change, Francis, has been done with the pandemic. It's forced companies that have been resistant for so long to have to look at working in a different way. They've had to in order to survive, and oftentimes changing minds, changing how people look at the reality of way they're working and where things are going is the hardest part. Now it's a matter of, since that work has been done, since that's been shaken up, what can we plug in over the next 3, 5, 10 years as we do that? High performance computing, I think, will continue to play an enormous role, and I don't think it's talked about enough in legal. I think supercomputing, I don't think, is represented enough in legal. There's a tremendous need for it. To your point about financial services, it's a huge part of where Wall Street is continuing to go in New York and in other areas around the globe. Huge. And there's a lot of information that's been talked about when it comes towards high performance computing and the evolutions in AI around where Wall Street is going. And they're facing the same constraints I talked about when it came towards connectivity. When we talk about things like the cloud, it's almost second nature now. 10 years ago, it wasn't, but now it's second nature in so many ways. A lot of these terms we're talking about, I think 10 years from now, are again second nature. It becomes part of that virtual collaborative space that we tend to take for granted now. It'll just be connected in more ways that won't seem as cumbersome, that nuanced incremental change. And then looking back, it seems completely transformational, of course. But what I also want to caution as far as looking forward with that crystal ball is, and I've made this mistake 10 years ago, is assuming that with all this change coming, so much is going to be different. And I think a lot is still going to be this, there's going to be quite a bit that's quite familiar to us as that ends up taking place. We'll still be having some of these same conversations around workflow that ends up taking place. The big rogue wave with this is quantum. And I call it that because there's so much about it that's uncertain. That's a breakthrough waiting to happen. Francis, that could happen in 3 and 5 years. It could happen in 10. It could happen in 50. We just don't know. The research around it is exciting, but it's hard to put that on a path that you could put into a business plan right now, so to speak, other than to be aware of it, track it. And my recommendation would be to look at the high performance computing community and look at some of the different publications that are available in there. HPC Wire is a great one. There's just different things that we can look at when it comes towards that. So,
I still remember a conversation when you were talking about the cloud about I won't say the law firm, but they are in the top 7 about with an HR director. And he was like, I'm not moving to the cloud. I'm not going that way. And I can say the firm absolutely has. And that was like about 7 years ago. Right. But it's interesting, isn't it? The mental shift. So if you look at that, do you think, is that where the stigma, the situation sits, is actually the mental change which needs to happen with the people? You know, let's talk about the humanity piece here, because with all this in, you've got a lot of fear. Oh, you know, we look at AI, we look at quantum, things are going to be quicker. My job's going to go, that job's going to go. You know, we have Susskind, don't we, who has been so spot on in a lot of what he has written over the years in terms of the predictions, and some things you have as well. My job's going to be replaced by robots. You know, but what is this sort of, you know, looking like for you? You know, will they be continuing to work in hand by hand? Do you think, how can you challenge that mental stigma? I think
it's important for people to look at history when it comes towards, am I going to be losing my job? What am I going to be doing? And then try to think of, how would a society really function if so many people are out of work? And how has it worked in the past? When you go back and look at the Roman Empire, right before Caesar ended up taking power, there were a lot of people out of work. there were a lot of problems that were happening. People don't tend to like being out of work when you look at large collective societies. And so I think trying to keep that in mind, that in order for there to be a profit, there have to be people employed in order to buy things. The reason that AI is taking off so much right now is the companies that are designing it, designing the software, deploying it to areas that are creating efficiencies in transportation, the way people receive things, the way people shop online, all of these different elements, these small changes, all of these things, it leads to automation. Yes, people end up getting displaced as it happens, but then try to step back and think, what is the economic model? What is the economic model for too many people being out of work? That was part of the US presidential candidacy this year. There were individuals talking about this as far as talking about this, as far as, well, I mean, what's some of the plan around that? And I think rather than taking a look at that and taking one of the stances that one of the presidential candidates did, it's more of actually saying, you know, is that really what's going to happen? Are you going to really have so many people put out of work that you're going to have mobs of people looking at this and they're going to end up needing, I mean, I think it's about asking these type of questions and then taking a look at the way that we have our business and look back 10 years and see, have we been able to create efficiencies, create levels of automation? Yes. Some firms have still not done it and are still doing okay, and it's just a matter of time before it's needed. Again, as I mentioned, it all comes down towards practice area, how we're taking a look at what we do. But when taking a look at changing these minds, one, again, is with the pandemic, people realizing change needs to happen. People realizing we need to take a different way of looking things because we've been able to stay in business and how we've done that or we haven't been able to. Now we need to start something new. But the reason I'm taking a more optimistic tone here is that for a number of years, I think there's been a perspective that too many people are going to be put out of work. And I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm just saying I think it's important for us to have an open discussion around what are some of the other optimistic scenarios we could take a look at. Uber is a business that seemed to come out of nowhere and catch fire, and there's so many people working it as a side gig different ways, right? You'll have people that are part of unions protesting it, but it seemed to come out of nowhere. It may very well go by the wayside as far as employment because you have automated driving that takes its place. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be another industry that does come. If you can imagine a virtual environment beyond the meetings that I'm talking about, but more of a virtual interaction that you can end up happening, there are whole new fields of law that come towards the way people interact as people become more interconnected with augmented and virtual reality. When people begin to embrace what seemed a buzzword for 10 years, this Internet of Things, like, give me a break, where is it? What are you talking about? It's missed that level of connectivity. To interact with that, there's new levels of business model that take place. Things like GPT-3, you can use that to help leverage code. You can use that to take the job of certain developers. But when I was a developer at Intel 20 years ago, there was levels of automation happening then. There were discussions then about not being able to return to work. There's always different ways if you have an economy growing, if people have needs to try to fit and create different needs. You have to have a balance of people that are able to buy in order to get this level, to get some of the products that are currently automating other individuals out of a job. Once you miss that, then I think that once that balance is off, I think some of the arguments about everyone's out of work, they don't fall down, but I think that we should challenge them, take a look at them. Again, the reason I'm mentioning that, and it may seem off base, but the reason I'm mentioning that is that I think oftentimes when talking about tech, sometimes technologists talk almost in this bubble away from the realities that people are working through. And I think sometimes it's important to take a look at a global perspective, a cohesive perspective, and inclusive perspectives of multiple industries, where governments are going, where governments are investing, where different research elements are going, taking a look at concepts like climate, where it's changing, how that's pushing, where people are migrating. We have to look at those things as business leaders in order to see where things are going to trend in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And it's a long answer to your question, but wanted to make sure I answered as fully as I could.
No, thank you. And you have, and it's hard too, but I think that's the biggest question, isn't it, for people, is the kind of humanity side. Yes, leadership is key, but also knowing what is around, what is useful now, what is actually here, but yet what is a bit far in advance, because especially if we look where people tightening their belts, you got others who are going, you know what, right now is the time for us to go big, you know, but may not necessarily be in the UK legal system. on that question, but it's there. So no, but thank you. And I mean, if you had to say a few words to people, what would you leave as a parting thought yourself, Eric, on this when you look at legal tech and where we are?
I would answer with a paradox of a paradox of a statement. Stay optimistic, but stay realistic. Look forward. It's really important to look forward. It's incredibly important to look forward of where research and development is going outside of legal. And then it's also important when looking at legal tech is who is backing the companies who are backing the companies that you're looking at. Who has invested, who has bought them, what are their competitors doing? And the reason that's important is because their investment dictates where they're going to be developing typically over the next 3 to 5 years. Have those conversations about where they're developing over the next 3 to 5 years. And the other thought, again, is to look outside of law and at that larger cohesive atmosphere. It's become, particularly during the pandemic, you become very localized about what's happening, this immediacy. And there's also, again, politically, not taking any stance, but there's been a rise in this kind of nationalistic perspective that takes place in multiple countries. I think it's important for us, as that's happening, to then say, whatever's happening that way, how does it affect business relationships? And then take a good, hard eye about how those business relationships may forge, last, or what type of innovation, what type of potential you can have for meeting different people, having these different type of relationships. And the other thing would be to very much push outside your own comfort zone when it comes to your own research. Doesn't have to be in your own job and what you're doing, but in your own personal development when it comes towards what it is that you do, your own research that you do. Look outside the community, look outside some different areas, and try to go to some different events once we can travel, and try to take in some different knowledge than you normally would. And that's how you end up tending to push things and look at things a different way, if that makes sense.
No, thank you, Eric, and really thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And with me, it's been great to see you, even if it's
see you again, Francis.
Virtual, I know. And for everyone joining us, thank you. And Larry said wonderful insights, and thank you, Eric. A powerful hour for him. So really, thank you for sharing them. And if any of you have any questions or want to ask anything, do reach out to us, and I'm sure Eric will be happy to help or answer questions as well. So thank you, and we look forward to you joining us for another LegalTech Talk.